The sound of a child crying pierced the silence of the mansion. Robert Morgan froze at the doorway of his living room briefcase, still clutched in his hand. The golden glow of the chandelier fell across marble floors, illuminating a scene he never expected to witness in his own home. There stood his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, dressed in a filthy, tattered pink dress, her small arms wrapped protectively around her 8-month-old baby brother, Ethan. Her voice broke with desperate sobs as she pleaded, "Please don't hurt me and my brother anymore." Time seemed to stop. Robert felt his breath catch in his throat as he took in the full horror of what was happening. Emma's thin wrists bore purple marks like fading bruises. Ethan's face was red, his cries relentless, his tiny hands reaching out and clinging to his sister as if she were his only protection in this world. Standing across from them was Victoria, his second wife, elegant in a tight red dress, her blonde hair styled perfectly, face heavily made up. But her voice contained none of the sweetness she typically showed Robert. It cut like glass. "Shut up. How many times have I told you not to bother me? If you don't listen, I will throw both of you out on the street again." Before he could process what was happening, Robert moved on instinct. He placed himself between Victoria and the children, a human shield, against whatever had been happening in his absence. He reached toward Ethan, his movements awkward after so many months without holding his son. "Let me take him. Emma, come here to Daddy." The girl froze her fingers, gripping the edge of her dirty dress. Robert hesitated, his hand hovering in the air before pulling back. Something in Emma's frightened eyes stopped him cold. His own daughter was afraid of him. Victoria's demeanor changed instantly. The venom in her eyes vanished behind a gentle smile as she placed a light hand on Robert's jacket sleeve. "You're back early. I was just teaching the children some discipline. They were being too wild." Her voice softened like honey. "You must be tired after coming home. Don't get so worked up over a moment of childish whining." Robert held Ethan tightly against his chest, his throat burning with emotion. He glanced at Emma, saw the panic in her eyes, then back at Victoria's tender smile. She tilted her head, pressing her lips together in a practiced expression of pity. "Maybe you just feel guilty for being away too long, so everything looks worse than it is. Children look at the adults around them and learn how to behave." The words slipped out soft as a spring breeze, but sharp as a blade. Robert lowered his eyes, swallowing hard, struggling to maintain his composure. "I don't want to hear crying like that in this house." Victoria seized his words, twisting them to her advantage. "Exactly. That's why I handle things the gentlest way possible. Go take a shower and change. Make yourself comfortable. Don't let the kids see us at odds. It's not good for them." As she finished speaking, she cast a sidelong glance at Emma. A single faint smirk was enough to make the girl bow her head. Robert saw it, though he could not fully comprehend what it meant. He stood frozen, half anger and half guilt, tangled into a knot inside him, one painful question echoing in his mind. What did I just witness in my own home? Robert Morgan sat behind his mahogany desk on the top floor of Morgan Construction headquarters in downtown Chicago. At 45, he commanded one of the most successful building empires in the Midwest. The crystal chandelier cast prismatic reflections across his office light, glinting off the Rolex on his wrist. Everything around him spoke of wealth, success, and power. He signed each document mechanically, his tailored Armani suit fitting perfectly across his broad shoulders, Italian leather shoes gleaming beneath the desk. These were the very things any American man might dream of. Yet inside his heart felt hollow. Robert had once known true happiness. Catherine, his first wife, had been the light of his life. Emma used to run around their backyard, her soft brown hair bouncing in the wind as Catherine watched, laughing. Then came Michael, their baby boy, born amid tragedy 8 months ago. The day Catherine left this world due to complications during childbirth was the day something inside Robert died too. 8 months had passed, and he had not once sat down to play with Emma, nor truly held Ethan in his arms. He buried himself in business trips, paperwork, and numbers running from memories that haunted him. During that time, Victoria appeared like salvation, personified. Once Catherine's close friend, she had stepped into their house with a gentle presence, seemingly soothing everything broken with her radiant smile. To Robert, she was the devoted woman he needed. If Catherine had been light, then Victoria was his sanctuary from darkness. She had offered to care for both children as if they were her own, showing a tenderness that convinced him they would be loved in his absence. seeing that Robert felt reassured. At least the children have a woman at home, he thought. That is better than growing up with only a cold, distant father. He was always grateful that Victoria carried the burden he had abandoned. Today, after a month away, closing deals in Europe, Robert signed the last contract. Standing up, he caught his reflection in the tall mirror on the wall. His face appeared stern, eyes weary with dark circles beneath them. Suddenly a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to go home early without telling anyone. Maybe bring a small surprise. Perhaps Emma would run into his arms. Maybe Ethan would smile when held close. The thought softened something within him for the first time in months. Robert took his coat and walked out quickly before his secretary could ask another question. His luxury Mercedes sped along Lakeshore Drive toward his North Shore estate. That house had once been filled with laughter and warmth. Now it was merely a place Robert visited between business trips. Today felt different. He wanted to see his family. The iron gates opened automatically, and Robert stepped into the grand foyer. Everything was unusually still. He set his briefcase down on the marble entry table and removed his coat. Then from somewhere deeper in the house, he heard the faint sound of a child sobbing. Ethan. The sound pierced the silence. Robert froze. Amid the weak cries, another trembling voice followed. "Please don't hurt me and my brother anymore." And the scene that followed still burned in his mind as Robert sat at the dinner table that evening. Victoria had quickly composed herself, directing the housekeeper to prepare a meal while acting as though nothing unusual had happened. Dinner was arranged with military precision. The yellow light reflected on silver cutlery as the smell of roast chicken rose from fine china plates. Yet it could not drive away the cold feeling inside Robert. He sat at the head of the table, Victoria to his right, Emma across from him, and Ethan in a small high chair. His eyes still appeared red and unsettled. "Eat, sweetheart, so you'll grow strong," Victoria spoke as she placed a piece of meat into Emma's bowl. Her voice was sweet as honey, her smile fixed in place, but the hand she laid on the girl's shoulder pressed down with visible force. Robert saw Emma's small shoulders flinch and the spoon in her hand tremble. He leaned slightly forward, observing more carefully. "Emma, has anyone at school been bullying you?" The girl's startled eyes flashing with fear, before dropping quickly. No, father." Her voice was barely a whisper. Victoria let out a soft laugh and turned to Robert. "Children bump into each other when they play. I keep reminding her to be careful." Robert stayed silent, twirling the spoon in his hand. A wave of guilt washed over him, knowing that for months he had not been present to notice these small but telling details. Suddenly, Ethan kicked his legs, his lips curved downward into a trembling pout, and a wail burst forth. Victoria stood, walked around to pick him up. Her hands sliding under his arms, but gripping too tightly. The movement was quick, but without tenderness, and Ethan screamed louder, his face flushed red. "Give him to me!" Robert quickly stood, extending his arms, his voice hoarse and urgent. Victoria glanced at him briefly, then handed the boy over. Robert awkwardly caught him arms stiff after so long without holding his son. Emma lifted her head, her eyes filled with both surprise and the faintest glimmer of hope. Robert adjusted his hold, bringing the boy closer, rocking him gently. Ethan kept crying, but his sobs grew less sharp as Robert steadied his breathing, patting the boy's back in a gentle rhythm. "You're safe now. Daddy's here," Robert whispered. The words left his mouth, and he suddenly realized how long it had been since he had said something so simple, yet profound. Dinner dragged on with Victoria filling the silence, bringing up investment portfolios, asking about his business trip, sometimes turning to Emma with half-hearted questions, as if to prove she cared. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly housekeeper who had worked for the family since Catherine was alive, stood quietly in the corner. She did not interrupt once, but when Robert caught her gaze, he saw in her eyes an unease she could not hide. When the meal ended, Robert set his napkin on the table and spoke calmly. "I'm going upstairs to change and look over some documents. Emma, make sure you brush your teeth after you finish eating." "Yes, Dad." Emma's reply was faint, her eyes flickering quickly before dimming again. Robert pushed back his chair, lifted Ethan, and reluctantly handed the boy to Victoria. This time he noticed her hand more carefully, her thumb pressing into the child's side with practiced force. Robert pressed his lips together but said nothing. He turned away and walked toward the grand staircase, the wooden steps creaking softly under his feet. At the fourth step, he froze. He heard the faint clinking of glasses, the scrape of a chair, and then Victoria's voice dropped low, sharp, as a blade slicing through silk. "Listen carefully." Remember what I say. If you dare open your mouth to your father, I will throw you and your brother out on the street. I swear it." There was a pause, followed by the sound of quick, shallow breathing, surely Emma's, and then a strangled whisper. "Please, please don't. I'll stay quiet. I won't say a word." Robert stood paralyzed, hand gripping the banister, until his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs, as if trying to break free. His mind flashed with the images he had just witnessed: Victoria's shifting voice, sweet one moment, venomous the next; his daughter's terrified eyes, the bruises on her thin wrists, Ethan's cries in arms that were not gentle. Downstairs, Victoria's tone shifted again. She gave a thin laugh and spoke louder, just enough for her words to slip through the stairwell. "Good. Finish your food, and then I'll give you dessert." Robert remained motionless. Sweat dampened his palms, even though his body felt cold. He swallowed hard, but his throat stayed dry. His anger and guilt wrapped around him, squeezing until he could hardly breathe. Mrs. Peterson stepped softly out of the dining room, her shoes making almost no sound. She paused, eyes lifting briefly toward the staircase, as if she knew someone was there, but dared not look directly. She placed a folded towel on the lower banister, a small, discreet gesture that felt like a message. Robert bit hard on the inside of his cheek to steady himself. He knew he could not simply walk away as if nothing had happened, yet he also understood that a single outburst now might frighten those trembling little hands even more. He tightened his grip on the railing, drew in a long breath, and forced the breaking wave inside him back down. He remained there on that step, listening to the pounding of his own heart, the faint clatter of a spoon against a bowl, and the rise of a new and unmistakable command within him. A vow he could not delay, even one more day. That night, Robert did not sleep. He paced his study, occasionally pausing to stare out the window at the moonlight reflecting off Lake Michigan. His Rolex caught the light as he checked the time. 3 a.m. He listened to the small footsteps of his children and the whispers echoing down the hallway like needles piercing his conscience. When the sky turned pale with the first hint of dawn, he washed his face with cold water, adjusted his collar, and walked straight to the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson was already there, placing dishes onto wooden shelves. She had lived in this home since Catherine was a young bride. The elderly woman was quiet, meticulous, and always maintained proper boundaries. Hearing Robert's steps, she froze, thin, dry hands still holding a cloth. "How were the children while I was away?" Robert asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed his exhaustion. She hesitated, looked down, then sighed. "Do you want the truth, Mr. Morgan?" Robert nodded once. "I only want the truth, Miss." Peterson set the cloth down, speaking slowly, as if each word pained her. "Some nights, Miss Victoria made Emma stand on the porch for hours just for dropping a spoon. One night, I found her holding her little brother sleeping in the storage room because their bedroom was locked." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "Many times, Ethan was given only very diluted milk. He cried from hunger until he fell asleep, exhausted. I tried to intervene, but she told me I had no right to interfere with her way of raising them." Robert felt his heart clench. The image of Catherine holding a bowl of oatmeal, lifting Emma onto a chair, smiling as she told a bedtime story, came back like a blade cutting through memory. He swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Did you hear her make any threats?" "Yes." Her answer was soft, her eyes still fixed on the cloth in her hands. "She said if Emma ever told you both children would be thrown out. She also threatened to fire me if I ever spoke of it." "I truly am sorry, sir," she added. "She is far too cunning." Robert shook his head, resting a hand on the back of a chair to keep it from trembling. "It is not your fault, Mrs. Peterson. From now on, if anything happens, you tell me directly. And if necessary, would you be willing to testify?" The elderly woman raised her eyes, and in them was a quiet resolve. "For the children, I am willing." That entire day, Robert moved through the rooms of his mansion as if inspecting an unfinished construction site. He called his office and postponed every meeting, excusing himself with family matters. He went into the children's room, opened the closet to check blankets, examined bottles, and took notes. Every small trace of neglect felt like an accusation against him for being absent. Victoria smiled at him softly, inquiring about his work, but Robert said little. He told her they would talk later and asked the kitchen to prepare a light dinner. He did not want to cause alarm. He needed to see clearly to gather evidence, Night fell slowly. In the study, Robert pushed files aside until only a small, framed photo of Catherine remained before him. He placed his hand on the wooden desk, an apology lodged in his throat. The desk lamp lit the lines at the corners of his eyes. Outside in the hallway, the wind whistled faintly through a crack in the door. Then came the sound of hesitant steps, stopping at the threshold. The door opened slightly. Emma stood there holding Ethan tightly as he dozed, her eyes swollen and red, as if she had been crying for hours. Robert rose quietly, afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile shell protecting his children. He took Ethan into his arms, feeling how light the boy's body was and how uneven his breathing. The faint smell of watered-down milk clung to his collar. He motioned for Emma to sit, pulling a chair so they could be at eye level. But the girl still perched on the edge, her back-stiff eyes constantly flicking toward the door. "Dad!" The small call was barely a fragment of breath before it faded. Robert nodded as if to say there was no need to force out more words. He patted Ethan's back in an even rhythm, catching the faint gurgle of the boy's hungry stomach. Emma pulled her sleeve down to cover her wrist fingertips, brushing the frayed hem of her dress legs, drawing up whenever a distant sound stirred in the hallway. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken words. Robert handed Emma a cup of warm water. She received it with both hands, took a tiny sip, her eyes still fixed on the outline of the doorframe as though expecting someone to walk in at any moment. Robert wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but stopped himself, afraid that even one wrong word might cause her to retreat further. He chose instead a gentle phrase, as light as placing a blanket over her shoulders. "Sit here where it's warm." The girl nodded, let out a short breath, then lowered her eyes as her sleeve slipped back. A purple mark surfaced for a moment, and then vanished like a fish diving into dark water. Robert saw it, but pretended not to notice his chest tightening, with partial understanding and the weight of not yet having enough proof. Ethan drifted into drowsy sleep, his small hand clinging to Robert's collar, as though it were his last anchor. Robert remained perfectly still, afraid the slightest movement might wake the fragile piece, trying to take hold. "It's safe here." His voice was just above a whisper, its warmth carrying more than the words themselves. Emma gave a faint nod, her lips quivering as though she meant to speak, but then she fell silent again. Outside, the wind slipped through the crack in the door, rattling the key hook on the wall. The girl flinched, her hand curling back in a reflex born from fear. Robert reached out, intending to rest a light touch on her wrist as reassurance. Emma recoiled slightly, her chair creaking the softest sound. He froze instantly, his hand suspended in the air, then withdrew it as though from a flame. The silence thickened with another layer of understanding. Inside his chest, a question broke loose. When did the distance between father and daughter become this wide? My own child. Is she afraid of even my hand? Robert stood still for a long moment after Emma pulled away. He drew in a deep breath, carefully placed Ethan back in the portable crib he'd brought to the study, and pulled a blanket over him. Emma sat curled up on the chair, hugging her knees, her eyes still showing the remnants of tears. "Sleep here tonight. I'll be right next to you." Robert spoke slowly so she could hear him clearly. Emma nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. Robert dimmed the light, closed the door to his study, and walked into the empty hallway. The silence of the night seemed to swallow every breath. He could not sleep. Images of Catherine and her warm smile rose again and again from the darkness of memory. He opened the door to his late wife's room, preserved exactly as she had left it. A faint fragrance still lingered on the shawl that hung behind the door. Robert opened the wardrobe and pulled out a small drawer where Catherine used to keep mementos. A thin envelope slipped off the edge, caught against the wooden rim. On the front was the handwriting he knew so well. To Robert. He froze, hand trembling as he opened the letter. The slanted handwriting seemed like Catherine's voice, speaking directly to him after all this time. "If I am no longer here, please protect Emma and Ethan. Do not place your trust too quickly in anyone. Believe in your child's eyes. When she is afraid, she will not know how to lie." Robert sank down onto the floor, the paper quivering in his hand. His mind filled with the sight of Emma clutching her brother, her dress torn and filthy, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan had felt so light in his arms, his breathing broken from hunger and exhaustion. A wave of grief surged through him, no longer a vague sense of guilt, but a sharp, searing ache of fatherly love that tightened his chest. He pressed the letter against his heart, closed his eyes, as if hearing Catherine's voice, guiding him. "I am sorry, Catherine. From now on, I will protect our children." He opened his eyes, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, as though sealing a vow. His hand brushed the picture frame on the shelf, where Catherine's smile was forever preserved in glass and silver. From that moment, his path became clear. He would return to being a father in the truest sense. The next morning, Robert woke early. He brewed coffee, listening to Mrs. Bow, Peterson's familiar footsteps in the kitchen, and the faint clink of breakfast dishes. Victoria appeared soon after, neatly dressed in designer clothes, smiling as usual. "Did you sleep well today? I'll take Emma to her music class. Let's have an early dinner tonight." Robert gave a restrained smile. "I have things to do at home today. You keep to your schedule." He said nothing more, but his eyes never left Victoria's movements. By mid-afternoon, she received a phone call, lowering her voice as she answered. "All right, 10 minutes, in the back garden." Robert stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, watching Victoria walk toward the garden. He changed course, circling along the stone path until he stopped behind a row of poplars. From there, he could see the entire back lawn without being observed. A stranger entered through the side gate, a man in his 30s wearing an expensive dark coat with a thin leather bag slung over his shoulder. Victoria approached him, her smile no longer the gentle one she wore inside the house. "Right on time, Marcus," she said crisply. The man shook her hand quickly. "I only have 10 minutes. Are you sure about the authorization?" Victoria lowered her voice, but in the still afternoon air, her words carried clearly to Robert's hiding place. "It's a large sum. I want to bring it in early. The trust is under Morgan's name. If the signature is transferred, I'll gain control." Marcus glanced around nervously, then pulled out a thin stack of papers. "I need more proof that you have the right. The marriage certificate is there, but the proxy signature for the family fund is still missing. Morgan isn't a fool." Victoria gave a cold smile that sent chills down Robert's spine. "Don't worry, he's busy playing the perfect father now. As for the rest, I'll get it another way." Marcus folded the papers with obvious disapproval. "No more than 2 weeks. After that, the plan will be harder to execute." "Thank you." Victoria touched his hand with a familiar gesture that suggested their relationship went beyond business. Robert stood behind the trees, heart pounding heavily. He had heard enough to understand where the threat was pointing. This wasn't just about the shouting in the kitchen or the threats on the stairs. This was a deliberate plan to steal his children's inheritance, perhaps worse. Marcus left through the side gate. Victoria lingered a moment, adjusted her hair, then walked back into the house with a calm face, the perfect mask of innocence restored. Robert didn't move immediately. He pulled out his phone, the black screen reflecting his grim expression. 3 tasks lined up in his mind, as straight and clear as the blueprints he reviewed daily. Protect the children, preserve the evidence, and call an old friend who knew the law intimately. He went back inside, passing through the living room where Emma was stacking wooden blocks for Ethan. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen, then toward her father. Her eyes still carried caution, but there was also a small glimmer of something that might one day become trust again. Robert paused, laying his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. "You're safe with me?" Emma nodded her lips, forming a faint word. "Yes." Robert continued walking, his hand gripping Catherine's letter inside his jacket pocket. His heartbeat surged, not from fear, but from a late awakening, turning into action. He knew what he needed to face, and he understood something else, chilling in its simplicity. Victoria wasn't only mistreating his children. She was plotting to steal everything that should be theirs. Robert tightened his grip on the letter and walked toward his office. He had a call to make to an old friend who had stood by him through every major decision in his life. Thomas Reynolds had been his attorney for 20 years, but more importantly, he had been the best man at Robert's wedding to Catherine. If anyone would help him navigate this nightmare, it would be Thomas. Before making the call, Robert stopped beside the play area, bent down to pick up a wooden block that had rolled away and placed it in Emma's small hand. His voice lowered to reassure her. "You stay here with Daddy." Emma gave a slight nod, her eyes darting toward the kitchen, as if to check whether Victoria was listening. Robert felt his resolve harden. The time for action had come. That night, Robert stayed in the living room longer than usual. He sat beside the children, opened a children's book that Catherine used to read to Emma years ago, and read slowly, letting each word linger. His other hand maintained a steady protective rhythm on Ethan's back, until the boy's breathing became calm and even. Every time footsteps passed nearby, Emma stiffened her little hand, clutching at the hem of her dress, her gaze shifting to the window as if searching for an escape route. Seeing this, Robert whispered, "It's all right, Daddy is here." Victoria passed by once, smiled faintly, and asked as though in passing, "It's late. Let me take the children to their room. They have school tomorrow." Robert looked up, his tone deliberately calm, but firm. "I'll do it." Victoria shrugged and turned away, leaving behind a trace of expensive perfume that could not mask the unease beneath her polished manner. Mrs. Peterson came carrying a warm glass of milk. She placed it on the table beside Robert's chair, her eyes glancing at the door before meeting his, as if to silently remind him not to let the children out of his sight. Robert thanked her, urged Emma to take a few sips, then placed Ethan in the portable crib, pulling it close beside his chair as he finished reading the story in a steady, low voice. When the grandfather clock struck 9, Robert carried Ethan and guided Emma toward the children's bedroom. The door stood ajar, the room tidy but strangely cold and impersonal for a child's space. He straightened the blankets, laid the boy in the crib, pulled a small chair close for Emma to sit beside her brother, and spoke slowly. "Daddy is right here. Go to sleep." Emma nodded, but before closing her eyes, she still glanced outside, as if waiting for some threatening sound or presence. Robert dimmed the hallway light, stood at the doorway a while longer, then returned to his study, deciding to move his chair closer to the door so that, with one glance, he could still see the faint light spilling from the children's room. Near midnight, Robert lifted his head from reviewing financial documents when he heard a faint, metallic clink at the end of the hallway. He rose quickly, following the sound, his heartbeat racing. Before he could steady himself, someone had turned off the hallway light, leaving the space blurred in shadow. Robert flicked the switch, and the sudden brightness made him squint. In front of the children's room, Emma was sitting hunched on the floor, clutching Ethan tightly. The baby was hastily wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes were red, her cheek pressed against her brother's forehead, as if trying to keep him warm. The lock on the outside of the door clicked just as it released, and Robert understood at once what had happened. "Who left you out here?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse with barely controlled anger. She locked the room," Emma whispered each word, catching in her throat, as her arms tightened protectively around her brother. Robert knelt, gathered them both, holding Ethan firmly against his chest, while lifting Emma with his other arm. "Come with Daddy." He carried the children back to his bedroom, pushed the door until it met the frame, and locked it softly. Moving slowly so as not to startle them, Robert laid Ethan in the middle of his king-sized bed, propped soft pillows around him, and pulled the blanket to his chin. He slid a chair close for Emma beside the edge of the bed, then poured the rest of the warm milk Mrs. Peterson had provided into a small cup. "Drink a little before you sleep. You're tired." Emma clutched the cup with both hands, her lips pressed tight to hold back a sob, her eyes fixed on her father's face, as if waiting for a clear promise of safety. Robert sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on the blanket covering his daughter's legs. He did not touch her skin directly, remembering her earlier flinch, but left the warmth of his hand there like an invisible thread, connecting them. "I'm here tonight. You'll sleep in my room." In the softened glow of the night lamp, Emma looked up, her gaze lingering on the face of the man who had only appeared in brief flashes over the past 8 months between business trips and late nights at the office. Her voice trembled, breaking at the end of the sentence. "Dad, are you going to abandon us like my stepmother said?" Robert froze, his breath caught in his chest. Words that would have come so naturally before now vanished. For a long moment, he could only pull the little girl closer and hold her against him, his chin resting on the crown of her head. The familiar scent of milk and child sweat brought tears to his eyes. He did not know how to answer, without sounding too late, without sounding false. He only repeated the one thing he could be certain of. "I'm here." Emma gave the faintest nod, her small hand gripping the hem of his shirt, like someone holding on to a piece of driftwood in a storm. Ethan stirred, let out a faint murmur, and drifted back into sleep. Robert stayed still, listening to the breaths of his 2 children blending together his own heartbeat, slowing and settling into a heavy rhythm, like a silent promise being signed again in the darkness. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, stopping right outside the bedroom door. Robert tensed instinctively, his arm tightening protectively around Emma's shoulders. Through the crack in the door came Victoria's voice, smooth as silk, yet cold as steel. "I think we need to talk, Robert." Robert gently squeezed Emma's shoulder to reassure her, then sat her down on the bed and pulled the blanket up for Michael. He stood, opened the door just enough for Victoria to see him standing firm in the doorway. "The kids are asleep. Whatever it is, we'll talk in the morning." Victoria smiled, stepped back, her voice still soft. "As you wish." The door closed. Robert sat down in the chair, pulled out his phone, and dialed Thomas Reynolds' number. "Thomas, come by my house tomorrow evening. There's something in the portfolio we need to discuss." On the other end, his old friend answered briefly. "All right. 7. Thomas Reynolds was a corporate attorney in his 50s, discreet and straightforward. He had been with Robert since his earliest deals, understood how Robert thought, and could read details most people overlooked. He wasn't only skilled with contracts, but also deeply knowledgeable about family trusts and asset protection. Robert knew Thomas's presence would accomplish far more than any emotional confrontation with Victoria. The next evening, Victoria took charge of dinner preparations with practiced precision. She chose a white tablecloth, arranged red roses, and set gleaming silverware in place. When Thomas arrived, Victoria greeted him with the perfect hostess smile, every inch the devoted wife. "Such a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reynolds. Please come in." Thomas shook Robert's hand, his gaze sweeping the room before stopping at the corner where Emma was holding Ethan. He nodded to the children with a warm smile that reached his eyes, immediately putting Emma at ease in a way that spoke of his experience with his own grandchildren. Dinner began with soup. Victoria was attentive to every detail. In front of the guest, she placed the tenderest piece of meat into Emma's bowl, bent down to wipe a trace of milk from Ethan's lip, and spoke with honeyed sweetness. "Eat up, darling, so you'll grow strong." Emma replied softly, "Yes, ma'am," then tried to lift a small spoonful to her mouth. Robert glanced over and noticed that on his daughter's shoulder, Victoria's hand seemed casually placed, but her fingers pressed down hard enough to make the fragile muscle tighten visibly. Emma's face tensed and the spoon trembled in her hand. Robert kept his expression calm, as if he hadn't noticed, but a burning heat rose in his chest. Thomas filled the silence with business talk, his casual manner concealing his sharp observations. "I reviewed the infrastructure fund update. The allocation is leaning too heavily toward bonds. How long are you planning to stay defensive?" Robert answered briefly, while setting his hand on the table as a signal they had agreed upon earlier. "I need to review the structure of the family trust. I'll have you look it over." Victoria's eyes flicked quickly toward him, then she smiled again. "Mr. Reynolds, you're always so thoughtful, always keeping the family's security in mind." When the main course was served, Thomas turned to ask the chef about the sauce, looking away for just a moment. Victoria leaned close to Emma's ear, her voice as thin and sharp as a blade. "Remember this. If you so much as whisper a word, your little brother will pay the price." Emma froze, lowered her spoon, her eyes downcast. From that moment on, she ate no more. She sat silently, her hands tucked under the table to cover her wrist, still marked with old bruises. Robert noticed the motion. He lifted his glass of water, concealed a long, steady breath, and set it down firmly in its place, as if placing a small period on the decision he had just made. After dinner, Victoria poured tea. "I'll take the children upstairs first." She bent down, picked up Ethan, and smoothed Emma's hair in front of their guest. "Come on, sweetheart." Emma stood up. Before leaving, the girl glanced at Robert for a second, her eyes waiting as if asking whether it was safe to go. Robert gave a small nod. "Go on, I'll be up later." The living room was left with just the two men. Thomas set his teacup down, leaning back slightly into the leather armchair. He talked a bit more about the fund, then lowered his voice. "You want me to review the trust structure, don't you?" Robert answered shortly. "Yes, and also the power of representation." Thomas nodded. "All right, but let me ask you this." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Robert, with the intensity of 3 decades of friendship. "Since the moment I walked into this house, I saw a child flinch at a touch, an infant being held the wrong way, and a lady of the house controlling every glance and word. Did you call me here about money or about something else?" Robert stayed silent for a few seconds. He placed 2 fingers on the edge of the table to keep rhythm, then spoke slowly. Both, but the latter matters more. Thomas didn't rush. He pulled a small notebook from his briefcase and opened to a blank page. Then let's begin with the truth. Tell me what you've seen, what you've heard, and who you want to protect. Robert recounted everything in short, precise fragments without adding or omitting details. The words on the staircase, the lock on the outside of the bedroom door, the bruises, and the threat just now at dinner. Thomas jotted down key words, never interrupting, only nodding when needed. Victoria returned, smiling at the two men. "Do you need anything else?" Thomas replied politely. "Thank you." The tea was excellent. She closed the door behind her. He waited a beat before continuing, lowering his voice further. "My friend, I'm afraid your second wife is hiding much more than she lets on, and I can help you uncover the truth and protect what matters most to you." He tapped his pen on the paper where he'd written 3 words: Emma, Ethan, Catherine. Robert looked straight at his friend. In his eyes, the burning anger had settled into a cold determination. "Where should we begin?" Thomas Reynolds left around 9 that evening. Robert walked him to the door, kept his hand on the knob for a moment to steady his breath, then turned back into the house. He opened the children's room door, slightly saw Emma and Ethan, already asleep, pulled the blanket up to his daughter's shoulders, and placed her teddy bear back beside her. Then he closed the door and went straight down to the living room, where Victoria was pouring wine, the crystal glass casting a dark red reflection across the marble coffee table. "I need to talk to you right now." Robert stood across from her, his voice low and firm. "Emma has bruises. Explain it to me." Victoria set the glass down the corner of her lips, lifting in a practiced expression of confusion. "Are you accusing me of something I spent the whole day here with the kids? Did you see me cooking, bathing them, watching when they cried?" She grabbed the glass again and slammed it down, hard on the table. The stem cracked with a sharp sound, the wine splashing across the surface like blood. "I'll ask again. Are you accusing me of hurting your children? What did you do to my child?" Robert's voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed the storm building inside him. Victoria let out a dry laugh. "Do you really think I want to take care of Sarah's children? Can't you see from beginning to end, you never chose me? You only chose her shadow." Robert froze for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden shift to Catherine's name. He placed 2 fingers on the table to steady his rhythm. "Stay on point. Answer why the girl has bruises. Children fall." Victoria folded her arms defensively. "Besides, she's stubborn. She needs to learn to obey. I teach her the way a mother teaches a child." "A mother?" Robert tilted his head slightly. "Are you talking about Catherine? She taught them by holding them and speaking with them, not by locking doors and threatening." For a brief second, Victoria's face contorted with rage before smoothing back into its beautiful mask. She leaned forward, her voice cutting. "Catherine, always perfect, gentle, intelligent. Everyone adored her and me. I was nothing but her shadow. Did you marry me out of pity, or because Catherine asked you before she died?" Robert kept silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of truth settle between them. He spoke slowly, each word striking with precision. "I married you because I thought the children needed a woman in the house. I was wrong, and tonight I began correcting that mistake." Victoria burst into laughter, her voice thick with resentment. "Corrected how? By throwing me out? Do you think the court will believe you were away for a month on business? Who cared for the children, me? Who fed the baby his milk, me? And where were you hiding in your gilded office?" Robert did not back down. "You know why I called the lawyer here tonight. You know what I saw, and you also know what I heard." Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "Fine then, listen closely." She spat out each word, her eyes blazing. "I hate her, and I hate those 2 children who carry Catherine's face even more. Every time I look at them, I feel like I've lost again. I was by your side when you collapsed while she lay cold on a metal table, but you never once looked at me as the one you chose. Never." Robert exhaled long and pained. "You're right about one thing. I didn't choose anyone. I only ran from grief, but from tonight on, I choose to stand with those children. I won't let anyone hurt them. Not even you." Victoria tilted her head, her smile stretching like a cut across her face. "You think you can take everything back? You forget I am the legal wife. I have rights in this house, in this trust. If you want to fight, I'm ready." "Tomorrow," Robert said, his voice flat and cold, "I'll meet with Thomas about the trust and guardianship. I'll also speak with the police about abuse if necessary. You should prepare yourself." "You wouldn't dare," Victoria sneered. "You'll humiliate yourself in court. People will say Robert Morgan couldn't keep his wife, couldn't keep his house, couldn't keep his children. Can you live with that? I can live with their words. Robert lifted the napkin and set it down neatly, as if signing a contract in silence. What I cannot live with is the sound of my children crying. A soft creak of wood on the stairs made them both turn. On the landing, Emma stood pressed against the banister, clutching her teddy bear. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and something else, a desperate hope. Her small hand slid across the bear's fur, and the toy nearly tumbled down the steps. Emma bent to grab it, her hands trembling so badly that even when she hugged it tight, it still slipped. Robert took a step toward the stairs, his hand lifting instinctively. Victoria's smile sharpened into something cruel and triumphant. Neither of them said another word. The air froze around the ragged breaths of a child, trying not to cry. Robert managed to catch the teddy bear before it fell further, placed it back into Emma's hands, and whispered for her to return to her room. He waited until she was safely inside, then closed the door and leaned against it for a few seconds to steady his breathing. He pulled out his phone and dialed Thomas's number. "We start the process tomorrow morning." On the other end, Thomas gave only a short reply. "See you at 9. The next morning, Robert woke early, dressed carefully, and entered the children's room. Emma was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed, watching Ethan sleep in his crib. "We're going somewhere important today," Robert told her softly. "Get dressed in your nice blue dress, and I'll help Ethan get ready." Emma nodded, her eyes questioning, but without the pure terror of the previous day. "Where are we going, Dad?" "To see some people who will help us make sure you and Ethan are always safe." He kept his voice steady, not wanting to alarm her. "Mr. Thomas will be there too." Victoria was nowhere to be seen that morning. Mrs. Peterson informed Robert that she had left early, saying she had errands to run. Robert felt both relief and apprehension at her absence. The family court building in downtown Chicago smelled of paper and weak coffee. Thomas Reynolds walked beside Robert, holding a thick file that already included Mrs. Peterson's statement and photos of Emma's bruises. Emma clutched Robert's hand while Ethan had been left with a court-appointed childcare worker outside the hearing room. Just as they were about to enter the courtroom, Victoria arrived with a man in a dark blue suit, her attorney Alan Pierce. She wore light makeup, held a tissue, and her eyes glistened with perfectly timed tears. "Case number 104568, the clerk called out. "Morgan petitioning for emergency protection for minors." All 4 adults walked in. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Eleanor Chen, about 50, with bright piercing eyes, sat above them. She was known for speaking little, but observing much. Thomas began, "Your Honor, we request an emergency protection order and restrictions on contact for the respondent, Victoria Morgan, on the basis of emotional abuse and neglect. We have the housekeeper's testimony, photographs of the injuries, and evidence of threats against the children." Alan lifted his chin, cutting in immediately. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted stepmother. These accusations are speculative. There is no direct evidence linking any alleged injuries to my client's actions." Victoria dabbed at the corner of her eye. "The girl is sensitive, Your Honor. I only disciplined her as any mother would." Judge Chen nodded. "Call your first witness." Mrs. Peterson stepped up to the stand, her hands clasped together nervously, but her voice steady. Thomas asked concisely, "What did you see while Mr. Morgan was away on business?" "I saw Emma repeatedly forced to stand outside on the porch for hours once during a rainstorm, just for dropping a spoon. One night I found her and the baby sleeping in the storage room because their bedroom door was locked from the outside. The boy was often given only watered-down milk. I heard Mrs. Victoria threaten to throw them out if Emma told her father what was happening." Alan approached, his tone flat. "Mrs. Peterson, you're 62 years old, correct? Could your memory or eyesight have been mistaken in a dark hallway at night?" "No, sir." Her answer was firm. "I worked in that house for 10 years. I do not mistake what I see or hear." Thomas presented the stack of photographs, close-ups of bruises on Emma's left wrist and shoulder, taken 2 days ago, time-stamped and certified by a physician. Alan quickly countered, "Children run, they fall. These injuries are normal childhood accidents. The photographs don't prove who caused them or how they occurred." Victoria lowered her face, sobbing at just the right rhythm. "I did my best. He was gone for months on business trips. Everything fell on me." Thomas moved on to his next piece of evidence. "This is a letter Mrs. Catherine Morgan left behind before her death. It is not behavioral evidence, but provides important context about the family dynamics and her explicit instruction to protect the children from potential harm. The letter was handed up. Judge Chen read a portion, paused for a few seconds, then set it down. The court acknowledges it. The courtroom fell silent, tension building like a drawn string. Judge Chen glanced from one side to the other. The court requires more direct testimony. Can the child speak? Thomas looked at Robert as if asking for permission. Robert leaned down, whispering to Emma, "You don't have to say anything if you're afraid. I'm right here." Emma looked at the high judge's bench, then at her father's open hand, waiting for her decision. She took a short breath. "I want to speak." Emma stepped up to the witness stand, her shoes tapping softly against the wooden edge. The clerk asked her name and age. "My name is Emma Morgan. I'm 6 years old." Judge Chen nodded slightly, lowering her tone to be less intimidating. "Emma, you only need to tell the truth about what happens at home." Emma looked down at her hands, then raised her head. This time, staring straight ahead, she said, "Victoria told me if I told my dad what she did, she would throw me and my brother out onto the street. But I can't stay silent anymore. I don't want Ethan to grow up afraid like me." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she did not cry. From the bench below, Robert lifted a hand to cover his eyes, his breath escaping in a short, pained sound. Thomas set his pen down, not writing another word. The room was completely still. Judge Chen leaned back in her chair, her fingers interlaced as she studied Victoria's face, then Alan's, then back to Emma. "Thank you, child. You may step down now." Alan tried to recover. "Your Honor, a child's words can be influenced by an angry father. We need objective evidence." The judge raised her hand. "That's enough." She turned to the clerk. "Bring me the photographs again, and summon the child protection officer waiting in the hallway." Emma stepped down from the witness stand, passed by Robert, and paused for half a second. Robert squeezed her hand gently, pride mixing with pain in his eyes. The air in the courtroom had just begun to loosen when Victoria's chair suddenly screeched back. She shot to her feet, pointing toward Emma, her voice bursting out like a volcano. "Liar! You're just like your mother, always pretending to be so saintly when you're manipulating everyone around you." Victoria's scream still echoed when the bailiff stepped forward, quickly placing his hand out to stop her from advancing further. Judge Chen struck the gavel 3 times, her voice sharp. "Order the defendant will sit down immediately or be removed from this courtroom." Victoria let out a harsh laugh, but her shoulders had stiffened. Alan tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently. Robert placed his arm protectively around Emma's shoulders, shielding her from Victoria's rage. Judge Chen glanced over the file once more, then raised her eyes. Based on the testimony, the photographs of the injuries, the contextual letter, along with the threatening behavior, just witnessed the court issues an emergency protective order. The defendant, Victoria Morgan, is hereby suspended from all custody and visitation rights until a final ruling is made. Temporary sole custody is granted to the plaintiff, Robert Morgan. She paused briefly, fixing her gaze directly on Victoria. The court also notes the defendant's insulting and threatening behavior toward a child inside this courtroom. The defendant is held in contempt of court and remanded to custody for 24 hours. Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief. The bailiff motioned for her to follow procedure. The gavel fell one final time. This emergency hearing is adjourned. Robert bent down and held Emma tightly. The little girl buried her face against his shoulder, the stuffed bear wedged between them. When a social worker brought Ethan over, Robert wrapped his other arm around his son, as if afraid that even the smallest gap might let danger slip in. Tears flowed down his face before he could wipe them away. Thomas placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, silent but supportive. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. A young journalist from the local station held out her microphone. "Mr. Morgan, do you have any statement for the public?" Thomas stepped half a pace forward, raising his arm to shield the family. "Please make way. We are protecting the children's privacy." Robert only bowed his head, pressing Emma and Ethan close against his chest, carrying all 3 of them through the flood of camera flashes, like a man walking through heavy rain. Behind them, Victoria was being led out through a different exit. When she caught sight of Robert, she jerked violently, straining against the bailiff's hold. "You took everything from me," she hissed. "But remember this, Robert, one day. You'll pay for this. I'll never stop until I get what's mine." Robert stopped for half a beat. He didn't answer. He simply pulled Emma closer, one hand steadying Ethan's back, his head bent slightly as if shielding them beneath an invisible umbrella. The gesture itself spoke louder than any words. No one will ever touch my children again. Thomas leaned close to Robert's ear and whispered, "Go home right away. I'll continue working with the prosecutor. There will be police patrols around your house tonight." Carla Jennings, the Child Protective Services worker assigned to their case, nodded in agreement. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on the home environment, mostly so Emma can see that adults are standing on her side now." As they walked to the car, the young reporter called out one last time, but her voice had softened into something like a blessing. "Good luck to your family, Mr. Morgan." Robert turned his head and gave a small, grateful nod. Emma clutched her teddy bear tightly, her eyes looking out the window, her breathing calmer now. For the first time in months, father and daughter sat side by side, without a wall of silence between them. Night fell quickly over the city. In the back corridor of the courthouse, the metal door shut with a dry, sharp click. Victoria sat inside a small holding cell, the white fluorescent light glaring down on a face drained pale with rage. Her hand clutched the bars so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself. "Not by a long shot." The next morning, Robert woke early and went into the kitchen. He found Mrs. Peterson already preparing breakfast, moving with renewed energy and purpose. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan. The pancakes will be ready in 5 minutes. Would you like coffee now?" "Yes, please." Robert leaned against the counter, watching her work. "Mrs. Peterson, I want to thank you. Your testimony yesterday made all the difference." The elderly woman smiled. "I only told the truth. Those children deserve to be happy." A small noise at the doorway made them both turn. Emma stood there in her pajamas looking uncertain. "Good morning, Dad. Good morning, Mrs. Peterson." "Good morning, sweetheart," Robert said, feeling a wave of tenderness. "Are you hungry? Mrs. Peterson is making your favorite blueberry pancakes." Emma nodded, taking a step into the kitchen. Is Victoria coming back?" Robert knelt down to her eye level. "No, Victoria won't be coming back to this house. The judge made sure of that. From now on, it's just us, you, me, Ethan, and Mrs. Peterson." Relief flooded the little girl's face. She looked at the kitchen table, then back at her father. "Can I help set the table?" "Of course you can." Robert smiled, feeling something tight inside his chest begin to loosen. Later that morning, Thomas called with news. The police executed a search warrant at Victoria's private apartment, the one she kept secret from you. They found some interesting items, forged documents with your signature financial statements for offshore accounts, and correspondence with someone named Marcus Davidson about accelerating the plan. Robert sat at his desk phone, pressed to his ear. "What does that mean legally?" "It means we're dealing with more than just child abuse. This looks like conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly worse. The prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow." After hanging up, Robert sat quietly for a moment. The magnitude of what might have happened if he hadn't discovered Victoria's true nature sent chills through him. He glanced at the framed photo of Catherine on his desk. "You were trying to warn me," he whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood at the door, Ethan in her arms. "Dad, Ethan is hungry again. His bottle is empty." Robert stood immediately. "Let me take him." He gently lifted his son from Emma's arms, noticing how naturally she had been caring for her brother. "You've been taking care of him a lot, haven't you?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Victoria didn't like when he cried, so I learned how to make him stop." The simple statement broke Robert's heart. He followed Emma to the kitchen, where they prepared a fresh bottle together. "You know it's not your job to take care of Ethan all by yourself," Robert said gently, as he tested the milk's temperature on his wrist. "That's what adults are supposed to do. You're allowed to be a little girl." Emma looked at him with uncertainty. "But who will watch him when you're working?" "I'm taking time off work," Robert explained. "And when I do go back, we'll find someone kind and trustworthy to help us, but I promise I won't be gone for weeks anymore." Emma's eyes widened. "You're not going on trips?" "No more long trips," Robert confirmed. "My most important job is being your father." And that afternoon, Carla Jennings from Child Protective Services arrived for her scheduled visit. She was in her mid-30s with a warm smile and direct manner that immediately put Emma at ease. "I'm here to make sure everything is going well for you and your brother," she explained to Emma while Robert prepared coffee in the kitchen. "Dad is making us pancakes now," Emma told her seriously, "and we're going to paint my room purple next weekend." Carla smiled. "That sounds wonderful. Do you feel safe here now?" Emma nodded, clutching her teddy bear. Victoria can't lock the doors anymore. Carla's expression remained professional, but Robert could see the anger flash briefly in her eyes. She turned to him after completing her inspection of the house. "You're doing well, Mr. Morgan. I can see you're making changes already." She lowered her voice. "I'm recommending therapy for Emma. Trauma like this doesn't vanish overnight." "I'll arrange it immediately," Robert agreed. "For both children. And yourself," Carla added gently. "Parents need support too." After she left, Robert found Emma in her room, carefully arranging her few toys on a shelf. He sat on the edge of her bed, watching her methodical movements. "Emma, can I ask you something?" She turned, waiting. "How long was Victoria not nice to you?" Emma thought for a moment. "Since you went to Europe the first time. She was different when you were here." Robert calculated in his head. Nearly 6 months. 6 months of his daughter living in fear while he buried himself in work. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I should have been here. I should have protected you and Ethan." Emma came and stood before him, her small face serious. "Mom said you would come back to us." Robert felt his throat tighten. "Your mom said that—" Emma nodded. "The night before she went to the hospital, she told me you might get lost for a while, but you would find your way back because you love us more than anything." Robert couldn't hold back his tears. He opened his arms, and this time Emma didn't hesitate to step into them. He held her gently, feeling her small body relax against him for the first time in months. "Your mom was right," he whispered. "I did get lost, but I'm back now, and I'm never leaving again." The next day, Robert met with prosecutor Sarah Martinez in her downtown office. She was a formidable woman in her 40s, with a reputation for being relentless in cases involving children. "Mr. Morgan, the evidence we've gathered suggests this goes beyond simple child abuse," Martinez explained, spreading documents across her desk. "Victoria Hayes, that's her real name by the way, not Morgan, has a history of similar behavior. She's been married twice before, both times to wealthy men. Both marriages ended under suspicious circumstances." Robert leaned forward. "What kind of circumstances?" Martinez's expression darkened. "The first husband died of apparent heart failure at 45. No autopsy was performed. The second divorced her, but died in a car accident 6 months later, leaving her a substantial settlement." Cold dread settled in Robert's stomach. "Are you suggesting she—" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Martinez interrupted carefully. "But we're reopening those cases. What I can tell you is that we found evidence she was slowly adding small amounts of Digitalis to your drinking water. It's a heart medication that can be fatal in high doses or with prolonged exposure." Robert sat back stunned. "She was poisoning me." "It appears so. The plan seems to have been to gain control of your assets through the forged documents, then ensure you wouldn't be around to contest it." Martinez's voice softened slightly. "Mr. Morgan, if you hadn't discovered what was happening to your children, we might be investigating your death instead." On the drive home, Robert could barely focus on the road. The reality of how close he'd come to losing everything, his children, his life, was overwhelming. He pulled over twice, needing to collect himself before continuing. When he finally arrived home, he found Emma and Ethan in the garden with Mrs. Peterson. Emma was showing her brother a butterfly perched on a flower, her voice animated in a way Robert hadn't heard in months. The scene before him, so innocent, so precious, brought everything into crystal clarity. This was what mattered. Nothing else. That evening, after the children were in bed, Robert sat in his study reviewing files Thomas had sent over. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he called, expecting Mrs. Peterson. Instead, Emma stood there in her pajamas, hesitant but determined. "Dad, can I sleep in your room tonight?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I had a bad dream that Victoria came back." Robert immediately set the files aside. "Of course you can." He stood and held out his hand. "Would you like to bring Ethan too?" Emma nodded, relief washing over her face. Together they went to the nursery and carefully transferred the sleeping Ethan to Robert's room. Emma climbed into the big bed, her teddy bear clutched tightly against her chest. "Dad," she whispered as Robert turned out the light. "Yes, sweetheart. Are we going to be okay now?" Robert sat on the edge of the bed, his hand gently stroking her hair. "Yes, Emma. We're going to be okay. I promise." In the darkness, he could just make out her small smile before she closed her eyes. 2 days later, Thomas arrived with more news. They sat in Robert's study while the children napped upstairs. "The police arrested Marcus Davidson this morning," Thomas explained. He's singing like a canary to save himself. Apparently, he and Victoria have been working together for years. He helped her forge documents, set up offshore accounts, even researched untraceable poisons. What happens now? Robert asked. Victoria will be charged with attempted murder, child abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. She's looking at decades in prison. Thomas paused. There's something else. We found evidence suggesting she may have had something to do with her previous husband's deaths. The prosecutors in those jurisdictions are reopening the cases. Robert shook his head, trying to process it all. How did I not see it? How could I have brought that woman into my home, near my children? Thomas's expression softened. You were grieving Robert. Grief makes us vulnerable. Victoria knew exactly how to exploit that. She'd done it before. That doesn't excuse it, Robert insisted. I abandoned my children when they needed me most. Catherine trusted me to protect them, and I failed. You didn't fail, Thomas countered firmly. You caught it in time. Now you have a second chance to be the father they need. He gestured to the door. That's what matters now. Robert followed his gaze to find Emma standing in the doorway, watching them quietly. Emma, Robert said gently, how long have you been there? Not long, she answered. Mrs. Peterson said lunch is ready. Thomas smiled at her. Thank you for letting us know. We'll be right there. After Emma left, Thomas placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. Focus on them now, not on what might have happened. They need you present, not drowning in regret. Robert nodded slowly. You're right. From now on, they come first. Always. At lunch, Emma sat next to Robert, instead of across from him, a small but significant change. She carefully fed Ethan small pieces of soft vegetables, showing a practiced hand. You're very good with your brother, Thomas observed. Emma looked up shyly. Mom showed me how to take care of him before she went to heaven. Your mom would be very proud of you, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma considered this for a moment, then asked, Can we visit Mom's garden after lunch? It needs flowers again. Robert and Thomas exchanged glances. The garden had been Catherine's pride and joy, a beautiful space she'd created for their family. After her death, Robert had closed it off, unable to bear the memories. Yes, Robert said finally, I think it's time we brought Mom's garden back to life. After lunch, Robert, Emma, and Thomas went to the abandoned garden behind the house. Weeds had overtaken the once beautiful space, but the structure remained stone pathways, a small fountain, trellises for climbing roses. It's sad, Emma said, looking around. We can fix it, Robert assured her, kneeling down to her level. Would you like that? To make Mom's garden beautiful again? Emma's face lit up. Can we plant sunflowers? They were Mom's favorite? Absolutely. We'll start this weekend. That evening, after Thomas left and the children were asleep, Robert sat alone in the garden with a glass of scotch. The moon cast silver light across the overgrown beds, illuminating both the neglect of the past and the potential for the future. His phone rang. It was Sarah Martinez. Mr. Morgan, I wanted to let you know that Victoria Hayes has been formally charged. The judge denied bail, given the severity of the charges and her flight risk. Thank you for letting me know, Robert said quietly. There's more, Martinez continued. We found diaries in her apartment. She's been planning this for years, even before Catherine's death. She saw your wife as an obstacle to getting to you and your fortune. Robert's hand tightened around the phone. Are you saying she might have had something to do with Catherine's complications during childbirth? Martinez sighed heavily. We're investigating that possibility. The hospital records show some irregularities that weren't noticed at the time. I'll keep you informed. After hanging up, Robert sat motionless, the implications crashing over him in waves. Could Victoria have somehow harmed Catherine? Had his wife's death been part of Victoria's plan all along? The thought was too horrific to contemplate fully. He looked up at the stars, remembering how he and Catherine used to sit in this very garden, planning their future, dreaming of watching their children grow. I'll make it right, he whispered to the night sky, for all of us. The next morning, Emma found Robert at the breakfast table, reviewing blueprints. What are those, Dad? She asked, climbing onto the chair beside him. These are plans for our house, Robert explained. I'm making some changes. Emma studied the blue lines with interest. What kind of changes? Well, first, we're going to renovate your room and Ethan's nursery, make them exactly how you want them. And he pointed to another area. And I'm turning this space into a playroom for you both. Emma's eyes widened. A playroom just for us. Just for you, Robert confirmed with a smile. And look here, He flipped to another page. This is Mom's garden. I've hired a landscape architect to help us restore it, and we're adding a small playground beside it. Emma stared at the drawings in wonder. Are we really doing all this? Yes, we are. Robert put his arm around her shoulders. This is our fresh start, Emma. Our home is going to be a happy place again. What about your work? Emma asked hesitantly. Don't you have to go to your office? Robert shook his head. I've arranged to work from home most days. Thomas is helping me reorganize the company so I can be here for you and Ethan. Emma looked up at him, searching his face as if to determine if he truly meant it. I promise, Robert said, understanding her unspoken question. My most important job now is being your dad. For the first time since Catherine's death, Robert saw his daughter smile, really smile, her eyes lighting up with hope instead of fear. In that moment, as the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows and illuminated Emma's face, Robert knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, protecting what mattered most in the world. The rising sun cast long shadows across Catherine's garden as Robert Morgan stood amid the overgrown weeds, dew soaking the hem of his pants. 3 months had passed since that fateful day in court when Victoria's mask had finally fallen away. Today marked another chapter in their ongoing battle, the preliminary hearing where Victoria would face additional charges. Robert knelt and brushed his fingers against a tiny sunflower seedling pushing through the soil. Emma had insisted on planting them last weekend, adamant that they were her mother's favorites. They'll grow taller than you, Dad, she had declared with childish certainty, her hands covered in soil, face alight with joy, a stark contrast to the frightened child he had rediscovered that night months ago. Upstairs in the renovated bedrooms, both children still slept peacefully. Emma's room was now painted soft purple, decorated with butterfly decals across the ceiling. Ethan's nursery featured a hand-painted mural of woodland animals. Everything about their home had transformed from the cold, sterile showcase it once was to a place of warmth and life. Robert's phone vibrated in his pocket. Thomas Reynolds' name appeared on the screen. Morning, Robert. Ready for today? Robert exhaled slowly. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember what we discussed. Don't engage with her directly. Don't let her see any reaction. She feeds on that. Thomas's voice carried the weight of their countless strategy sessions. Martinez has built an airtight case. The new evidence about the digitalis poisoning is damning. Will Emma need to testify again? The question that haunted Robert's nights. No. The prosecutor is confident they have enough without putting Emma through that again. Thomas paused. How are the children doing? Robert glanced toward the house, where yellow light now flickered in Emma's window as she awakened. Better? Emma's nightmares have decreased to maybe once a week now. Dr. Wilson says she's making remarkable progress. And Ethan? Still too young to understand what happened, thankfully. But Dr. Wilson warned us to watch for signs as he gets older. Children process trauma in unpredictable ways. After ending the call, Robert headed inside to prepare breakfast. The familiar ritual of whisking eggs, measuring pancake ingredients, and brewing coffee had become therapeutic. Each morning task represented another brick in rebuilding their family life. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching the teddy bear she had named Brave Bear, a name she had chosen during her second therapy session. Morning, Dad, she said, climbing onto a stool at the counter. Are those blueberry pancakes your favorite? Robert confirmed, dropping a handful of berries into the batter. Did you sleep well? Emma nodded, but then her expression grew serious. Is today when you see the bad lady again? Robert nearly dropped the spatula. Despite his careful avoidance of discussing the case around her, Emma had clearly overheard something. Yes, he answered honestly, setting the bowl down and kneeling before her. How did you know about that? I heard you talking to Mr. Thomas yesterday. She picked at the placemat's edge. Dad, will she try to take us away again? Robert placed his hands gently on her small shoulders. No, Emma, never. That's why we're going to court, to make absolutely sure she can never hurt you or Ethan again. Do you remember Judge Chenchi's already made sure Victoria can't come near us? Emma studied his face with that penetrating gaze children sometimes possess. Promise? I promise, with all my heart. Robert held up his pinky finger, adopting the solemn ritual they had established in therapy. Pinky promise? Emma linked her tiny finger with his, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing. Mrs. Peterson says we're going to the park today while you do grown-up business. She says we need fresh air. That sounds like a wonderful plan. Robert returned to the pancakes, grateful for Mrs. Peterson's steady presence throughout this ordeal. The elderly housekeeper had become family in ways he'd never appreciated before. At the courthouse, security personnel kept the small cluster of reporters at a respectful distance. Inside, Sarah Martinez awaited them in the corridor, her characteristic burgundy blazer standing out amid the neutral tones of the legal environment. "Mr. Morgan, Thomas," she greeted them with firm handshakes. "I have significant developments to share before we begin." Something in her tone made Robert's pulse quicken. What kind of developments? Victoria's second husband, the one who supposedly died in a car accident 6 months after their divorce, is alive. Martinez's normally composed face showed a flicker of disbelief. He faked his death after discovering she was poisoning him and has been living under an assumed identity in Argentina for the past 5 years. The revelation struck Robert like a physical blow. He faked his death to escape her. Yes, James Harrington. He contacted the embassy after seeing international coverage of Victoria's case. He's provided a video deposition with extensive medical documentation, the same pattern of digitalis poisoning found in your water and coffee. Martinez lowered her voice. "Robert, this confirms our theory. Victoria is a serial offender. This is her established pattern. But why did Harrington never come forward before other people could have been saved?" The weight of what almost happened to him to his children pressed against Robert's chest. Fear, shame. He claims Victoria had powerful friends who threatened him. Martinez checked her watch. "His testimony will be played today. It strengthens our case substantially." When they entered the courtroom, Victoria was already seated beside her attorney. Gone was the glamorous socialite who had charmed Chicago's elite. She wore a modest navy dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a calculated appearance of demure vulnerability. She turned as Robert entered, her eyes locking onto his with unnerving intensity. The same eyes that had once convinced him she loved his children, that she wanted only to help his broken family heal. Thomas placed a steadying hand on Robert's arm, guiding him toward their seats. "Remember, don't engage." Judge Franklin Harrow entered his imposing presence, commanding immediate silence. "All rise." Throughout the proceedings, Martinez methodically laid out the case. The forged documents' offshore accounts, digitalis found in Robert's regular drinking water witness, testimony from Mrs. Peterson, and now James Harrington's explosive testimony. On the large courtroom monitor, Harrington appeared a man in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and haunted eyes. He described in clinical detail how his unexplained symptoms had begun shortly after Victoria expressed disappointment that his assets were tied up in irrevocable trusts. "I began keeping samples of my coffee, testing them privately through a lab contact," Harrington explained. "When I confronted her with evidence, she threatened me, said people like me disappeared all the time." As the deposition played, Robert observed Victoria's composure fracture. Her fingers dug into the table knuckles, whitening. The mask of innocence slipped, revealing glimpses of something feral beneath. "Your Honor," Victoria's attorney interjected, rising swiftly. "This 11th-hour testimony hasn't been properly authenticated. We move that it be excluded pending verification." The prosecution has provided full documentation authenticating the witness and his testimony, Martinez countered, including medical records, laboratory tests, and passport confirmation. The pattern matches exactly what Mrs. Hayes attempted with Mr. Morgan. Judge Harrow studied both attorneys. "The evidence is admitted. Continue, counselor." During the brief recess, Robert escaped to a quiet alcove, needing space to process the morning's revelations. The walls of the courthouse suddenly felt oppressive, each ornate cornice and marble column, a reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. His children orphaned, his assets stolen, his life extinguished. Robert Morgan. The voice froze him in place. He turned to find Marcus Davidson standing several feet away, flanked by 2 plainclothes officers. As part of his plea deal, Victoria's financial accomplice was providing testimony against her. "Mr. Davidson," Robert acknowledged coldly. Marcus looked diminished in prison attire, nothing like the polished financial advisor Victoria had introduced at dinner parties. Deep circles underlined his eyes, and a nervous tick pulled at the corner of his mouth. "I need to tell you something off the record." His voice was barely above a whisper. The officers exchanged glances but didn't intervene. Victoria wasn't working alone when Catherine died. Marcus's words tumbled out rapidly. There was someone else, someone who isn't in custody, someone with medical access who helped her. Robert felt blood drain from his face. What are you saying? I'm saying Catherine's death wasn't natural complications. Victoria had help at the hospital, someone who could alter medication, change charts. Before Marcus could elaborate, his attorney appeared, immediately cutting him off. Davidson, not another word. We had an agreement about unsupervised conversations. As guards led Marcus away, Robert remained frozen, the implications of what he'd just heard cascading through his mind. Thomas approached, concern etched in the lines of his face. What did he say to you? Robert repeated Marcus's words verbatim, watching Thomas's expression shift from concern to alarm. I'll tell Martinez immediately. This changes everything. When court reconvened, an unexpected development emerged. Victoria's attorney approached the bench, requesting a conference. After several minutes of hushed discussion, Judge Harrow addressed the court. In light of new evidence and discussions between counsel, we will adjourn until tomorrow morning. The defendant will remain in custody. As officers prepared to escort Victoria out, she suddenly turned toward Robert. This isn't finished, Robert. Not by a long shot. Her voice dropped lower. Ask yourself, who really helped Catherine die that day? A court officer intervened. Ma'am, no communication with witnesses. Robert sat immobilized, Victoria's words echoing as she was led away. Thomas squeezed his shoulder firmly. That's exactly what she wants to get in your head. Don't let her. Outside, Martinez intercepted them before they reached the parking lot. We need to talk about what Davidson told you. I've already contacted the district attorney about reopening the investigation into Catherine's death. You believe him, Robert asked. Davidson has been surprisingly cooperative since taking his plea deal. He's provided verifiable information about offshore accounts we wouldn't have found otherwise. Martinez's professional demeanor softened momentarily. I know this is difficult, but if someone at the hospital helped Victoria harm Catherine, we need to identify them. Whatever you need from me, Robert's voice sounded distant to his own ears. For now, be vigilant. Victoria has connections we haven't fully mapped. I've arranged for additional security at your home until we resolve this. The drive home felt interminable. Robert's thoughts churned with horrifying possibilities. Had Victoria orchestrated Catherine's death? Had she been stalking their family, waiting for the perfect moment to insert herself into their lives? When he arrived home, Emma ran to greet him at the door, her face bright with excitement. Dad, we saw baby ducks at the park, 7 yellow babies, following their mommy. Robert lifted her into his arms, holding her tightly. The stark contrast between the darkness he'd faced at the courthouse and his daughter's innocent joy overwhelmed him. Tell me everything about these ducklings, he said, pushing aside his troubled thoughts to fully inhabit this precious moment. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, Robert reviewed security footage from the new system installed throughout the property. Thomas had insisted on comprehensive security after Victoria's arrest cameras, motion sensors, panic buttons, and a safe room in the basement. Measures that had once seemed excessive now felt wholly inadequate. A gentle knock interrupted his concentration. Mrs. Peterson stood in the doorway, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in her hand. You look like you could use this, she said, placing the cup on his desk. Rough day in court, Robert sighed heavily. Victoria hinted that someone helped her harm Catherine. The prosecutor is reopening the investigation. Mrs. Peterson's hand flew to her mouth. Lord have mercy, that poor woman suffered enough without this. I keep thinking about Catherine's final weeks, Robert said, his voice hollow. Her regular doctor retired suddenly. There was a new physician assigned by the hospital. Catherine mentioned feeling uneasy about her, said something felt wrong, but I dismissed it as pregnancy anxiety. He looked up at Mrs. Peterson. What if that doctor was working with Victoria? The elderly housekeeper lowered herself into a chair, her face paling. Dr. Mendez, I remember Mrs. Catherine complaining about her, said she changed medications without proper explanation. Robert straightened. Did Catherine ever mention her full name? Elena Mendez, I believe. Mrs. Peterson's forehead creased with concentration. Catherine showed me the prescription, once asked if I thought the dosage seemed high. I told her I wasn't qualified to judge such things, but perhaps she should get a second opinion. Her voice wavered. The next day, she had that terrible headache and was rushed to hospital. Robert immediately reached for his phone. "I need to tell Martinez about this." The prosecutor answered promptly, despite the late hour. Robert relayed the information, hearing Martinez's sharp intake of breath. "We'll check hospital records immediately," she promised. "If this Dr. Mendez exists and had any connection to Victoria Hayes, we'll find it." Robert barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Catherine in her final days, pale increasingly unwell, yet radiantly happy about their son's impending birth. Had she been systematically poisoned by someone she should have been able to trust? The thought was unbearable. Before dawn, he gave up on sleep and went to check on the children. Ethan was already awake in his crib, babbling happily at the mobile Catherine had chosen before his birth. When he spotted Robert, the boy extended his arms, face breaking into a joyous grin. "Good morning, little man," Robert whispered, lifting him gently. "Let's let your sister sleep a bit longer." In the kitchen, as he prepared Ethan's breakfast one-handed, his phone vibrated. Martinez's text was brief but urgent. "Found Mendez. Need to meet ASAP." After arranging for Mrs. Peterson to watch the children, Robert drove to the prosecutor's office. Detective Michael Rodriguez from Homicide sat beside Martinez, his weathered face grave. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Martinez began. "What you told me about Dr. Elena Mendez led to a significant breakthrough. She exists, but Elena Mendez is not her real name." Detective Rodriguez slid a photograph across the desk. "This is Dr. Mendez from hospital security footage during the time she treated your wife." Robert studied the image, a woman in her early 60s with dark hair streaked with gray, wearing standard medical scrubs and a white coat. He didn't recognize her. "Now look at this." Rodriguez placed another photo beside the first. "This is Elaine Hayes from 10 years ago." The resemblance was unmistakable. Same bone structure, same piercing eyes. The woman had aged, dyed her hair, perhaps had minor cosmetic procedures, but it was clearly the same person. "Victoria's mother," Robert's voice barely functioned. "Yes, Elaine Hayes was a nurse who lost her license 20 years ago for stealing medications and falsifying prescriptions." Martinez leaned forward. "She disappeared from the system until 5 years ago when she emerged as Dr. Elena Mendez with elaborately falsified credentials. She worked at 3 hospitals before treating Catherine. And her connection to Victoria during this time, phone records show daily communication between them throughout Catherine's pregnancy. The day after Catherine died, Elaine Hayes emptied her apartment overnight and vanished. The terrible truth crystallized with devastating clarity. They planned it together. Victoria wanted Catherine removed so she could take her place. "We believe so," Martinez confirmed. "With the evidence we now have, we're upgrading the charges against Victoria to include conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in Catherine's death." "What about Elaine Hayes? We've issued an international warrant. Border Patrol and airports have been alerted. If she attempts to enter or leave the country, we'll know." Robert stared at the photographs, a horrible realization forming. If Victoria's mother killed Catherine, could she try to harm my children if Victoria asked? The silence that followed was answer enough. "We're assigning protective detail to your home immediately," Detective Rodriguez said already on his phone. "Officers will maintain surveillance until Elaine Hayes is apprehended." By the time Robert arrived home, 2 unmarked police vehicles were already positioned near his property. Detective Rodriguez had arranged for 24-hour protection until the threat was neutralized. Robert found Emma in the garden, carefully watering the sunflower seedlings. She looked up with a smile that was increasingly reminiscent of Catherine's. "Dad, look, this one has its first real leaf." She pointed proudly to a tiny green sprout. He knelt beside her, genuinely marveling at the resilience of life pushing through soil. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Your mom would be so proud of how you're caring for her garden." Emma beamed with pride, then noticed the police car visible through the garden gate. Her expression sobered. "Why are those people watching our house?" Robert had sworn never to lie to his children again. "They're police officers. They're here to make sure we stay safe." Emma's expression grew serious. "Because of Victoria." "Yes, and some other people who might have helped her." He chose each word with care. "Remember how I promised that no one would ever hurt you or Ethan again. These officers are helping me keep that promise." Emma considered this with surprising maturity, then nodded. "Like guardian angels in police cars." Robert smiled, despite everything. "Exactly like that." That evening, Thomas arrived to review security measures and legal developments. They spoke in hushed tones in Robert's study, mindful of the sleeping children upstairs. "Martinez called me," Thomas said, accepting the scotch Robert offered. "They've added the murder charge against Victoria. Her attorney is frantically trying to negotiate a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" 25 years minimum, no possibility of early parole, in exchange for information on her mother's whereabouts. Thomas swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Martinez wanted your input." Robert considered the offer, staring at his wedding photo on the desk, Catherine radiant in white, his younger self looking at her with unguarded adoration. "If it helps catch the woman who killed Catherine, I can accept those terms." Thomas made a note. "I'll inform Martinez." Robert twisted the gold Rolex on his wrist, Catherine's wedding gift, to him. He had never taken it off, even during the darkest months after her death. "I keep thinking about her final days, Thomas. The signs were there. She complained about feeling strange after taking medications. I dismissed it as normal pregnancy symptoms." "Robert, don't torture yourself," Thomas said firmly. "You couldn't have known. These women are practiced predators. They've done this before." "But I should have protected her. I should have—" "Stop!" Thomas set his glass down. "Catherine wouldn't want you drowning in guilt. She'd want you focused on protecting Emma and Ethan now, which is exactly what you're doing." The wisdom in Thomas's words penetrated Robert's grief. He nodded slowly, exhaling the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Morning brought shocking news. Victoria had attempted suicide in her cell overnight. She was under medical supervision at the county hospital. Her condition stabilized, but the hearing delayed indefinitely. "Do you believe it was genuine?" Robert asked Martinez over the phone. "The corrections officers found her in time, which seems convenient." Martinez replied, skepticism evident. "It could be a ploy for sympathy or an attempt to delay proceedings. Either way, she's under guard and restrained." What neither of them anticipated was that Victoria had orchestrated the suicide attempt for an entirely different purpose. While being transported to the hospital, she had managed to slip a note to an orderly detailed instructions for her mother. Robert learned of this breach 3 hours later when Detective Rodriguez called with alarming news. The orderly was found unconscious in a supply closet. His uniform and ID badge are missing. Hospital security footage shows an older woman matching Elaine Hayes' description using his credentials to exit the secure ward where Victoria is being held. They spoke for approximately 2 minutes. Cold dread seized Robert's chest. "She knows where we are." "Assume so. Additional officers are en route to your location now. Do not open the door for anyone until they arrive." Robert immediately sought out Mrs. Peterson and the children, finding them in the playroom, where Emma was showing Ethan how to stack colorful blocks. "Mrs. Peterson, we need to move to the safe room." Robert kept his voice controlled despite his racing pulse. "Now!" The elderly housekeeper, perceptive as always, immediately sensed the urgency. "Come along, children. We're going to play a special game downstairs." Emma looked up, concern crossing her face. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Just a precaution, sweetheart, like a fire drill at school." Robert maintained a reassuring tone. "Can you help Mrs. Peterson gather some toys for Ethan?" Emma nodded solemnly, collecting her brother's favorite stuffed elephant and several books. Robert checked the security system on his phone. All cameras showed normal activity around the perimeter police vehicles, visible at both ends of the street. They had just reached the basement when the security system chimed, indicating the front gate had been opened. Robert checked the camera feed to see a service van from the company that maintained their garden irrigation system. "Stay here," he instructed Mrs. Peterson. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me or the police." "Robert, please be careful," Mrs. Peterson urged, clutching Ethan protectively. He squeezed Emma's shoulder reassuringly before heading upstairs. Through the security monitor, he watched the van park in the circular driveway. A woman in the company's uniform stepped out carrying a clipboard. She appeared to be in her 30s, with red hair visible beneath her cap, nothing like the photos of Elaine Hayes. Robert activated the intercom. "Can I help you?" The woman glanced up at the camera. "Scheduled maintenance for the sprinkler system. I have the work order right here." She held up the clipboard. "There's no maintenance scheduled today," Robert replied, already alerting the officers outside. The woman's pleasant expression vanished, replaced by cold determination. "Let me in, Mr. Morgan, or things will get very unpleasant." Before Robert could respond, the security feed from the garden perimeter triggered an alert. He switched views to see an older woman already on the property, moving swiftly toward the rear entrance. Elaine Hayes had used the van as a distraction while breaching from another direction. Robert hit the panic button simultaneously, calling Rodriguez. "They're here. 2 women, one at the front door, another already inside the perimeter." "Officers are converging now," Rodriguez responded. "Get to your safe room immediately." Robert was halfway down the hall when the distinctive sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. He changed direction, grabbing the heavy baseball bat he kept in the hall closet. If Elaine Hayes reached the basement door before the police arrived, his children would be trapped. He positioned himself at the top of the basement stairs, bat raised as footsteps approached from the kitchen. The woman who appeared in the doorway matched the updated photos of Elaine Hayes' early 60s hair, now blonde face, harder than in her nurse's ID. She held a syringe in one gloved hand. "Mr. Morgan," she said with clinical detachment, "where are the children?" "The police are already on their way," Robert replied, maintaining his protective stance. "You won't reach my children." Elaine's mouth twisted into a smile that never reached her eyes. "I don't intend to hurt them. Victoria simply wants what's rightfully hers. The children belong with their mother." "Victoria is not their mother," Robert growled, gripping the bat tighter. "Such loyalty to a dead woman." Elaine's voice carried the dispassionate tone of someone discussing the weather. "Did you know Catherine suspected something was wrong with her medication? She tried to tell you. She left a message on your voicemail the day before she died. A message you never heard because Victoria deleted it." The revelation struck Robert like a physical blow, but he maintained his position. "You murdered her. You poisoned my wife to clear the way for your daughter." Victoria deserved happiness. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed Elaine's face. Catherine had everything: the perfect husband, perfect life, perfect children. "My daughter grew up with nothing while I struggled to support us after her father abandoned us." She took another step forward. "Now Victoria has nothing again thanks to you." Sirens wailed closer. Elaine glanced toward the windows, momentarily distracted. Robert seized the opportunity, lunging forward and knocking the syringe from her hand. It clattered across the hardwood floor as they grappled. Despite her age, Elaine fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. The front door splintered as police stormed in. Elaine broke free from Robert's grip, diving for the fallen syringe. Her fingers had just closed around it when officers tackled her, forcing her to the floor. "Hands where we can see them." An officer secured her wrists with handcuffs, while another kicked the syringe safely away. Robert sagged against the wall, adrenaline still coursing through his system. "My children, they're in the basement safe room." Detective Rodriguez appeared from the kitchen, holstering his weapon now that the immediate threat was contained. "The other suspect is in custody. Are you hurt?" "No, I need to get to my children." Together, they descended to the basement. Robert knocked on the reinforced safe room door. "Mrs. Peterson, it's Robert. Everything's safe now. The police are here." The heavy door opened slowly. Mrs. Peterson stood protectively in front of Emma and Ethan, her face pale, but composed. "Thank God you're all right." Emma rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Robert's waist. "Dad?" "We heard loud noises. I was scared." Robert knelt, gathering both children close. "It's over now. The police caught the bad people. They can never hurt us again." Over the next hours, the house buzzed with police activity. Evidence technicians analyzed the syringe Elaine had carried. It contained a lethal dose of digitalis, the same substance found in Robert's drinking water months earlier. The maintenance worker at the front gate was identified as Jessica Maines, a former patient of Elaine's with a history of drug addiction, likely coerced into helping. By evening, Martinez arrived with news. Victoria has confessed to everything in exchange for certain concessions regarding her mother's treatment. She's provided detailed accounts of how they planned Catherine's death and her subsequent infiltration of your family. "What kind of concessions?" Robert asked, seated at his kitchen table while officers completed their work. "Medical care for Elaine Hayes' advanced pancreatic cancer. Apparently she has 6 months to live at most." Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Even in confession, Victoria shows no remorse for Catherine or what she did to your children. Her only concern was ensuring her mother wouldn't die alone in prison." "Was it all about money?" Robert asked, still struggling to comprehend the depth of Victoria's calculated cruelty. "Partly. Victoria claims they needed your fortune for experimental cancer treatments overseas. But she also admitted something disturbing: she'd been obsessed with your family for years. She saw Catherine as having the life she deserved." That night, after the police departed and additional security measures were installed, Robert sat with Emma on the garden bench. The summer evening was warm fireflies beginning to dance above the flower beds. Dad, Emma's small voice broke the comfortable silence. Are the bad people really gone forever? Yes, sweetheart. They can never hurt us again. Good. She leaned against his side, her small body warm and trusting. Mom's flowers look pretty in the moonlight. Robert gazed at the young sunflowers they had planted together, their stalks reaching skyward with quiet determination. They do. I think she would love what we're doing with her garden. I wish she could see it, Emma said softly. I believe she can, Robert replied, arm around his daughter's shoulders. I think she watches over all of us. Emma considered this idea, her face serious in the gathering twilight. Like our guardian angel. Exactly like that. 2 years passed. Catherine's garden flourished under Emma's dedicated care, becoming a sanctuary for butterflies, hummingbirds, and family memories. Emma, now 8, had blossomed into a confident, compassionate girl who excelled at science and art, combining both in her detailed nature journals. Ethan, nearly 3, raced through the yard on sturdy legs, his curiosity boundless, especially for the butterflies that frequented the garden. The legal battles had concluded. Victoria received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Elaine Hayes died in prison hospital 5 months after her arrest, her daughter at her bedside, the only concession the court had granted. The nightmare had ended, replaced by new memories of birthdays, school achievements, and quiet Sunday afternoons in Catherine's garden. On this particular summer day, Robert sat on the patio, watching his children play beneath the sprawling oak tree. Mrs. Peterson, still vital, despite her advancing years, emerged from the kitchen, carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade. Perfect day for a picnic, she observed, setting glasses on the table. Emma's teacher called. She won the science fair with her butterfly habitat project. Catherine would have loved helping with that. Robert smiled, finally able to speak of his first wife without the sharp edge of grief. The memories now brought comfort rather than pain. She would be proud of all of you, Mrs. Peterson said gently. Especially you, Robert. You've become the father these children always deserved. Emma ran to the patio, breathless with excitement. Dad, Ethan said metamorphosis. Well, sort of. He said metamorphosis, but he knows what it means. Did he now? Robert laughed, following Emma to where Ethan crouched by the butterfly garden, pointing at a chrysalis attached to a milkweed stem. See, Dad metamorphosed. The little boy announced proudly, his pronunciation charming in its earnestness. That's exactly right, buddy. Robert ruffled his son's dark curls, so like Catherine's. That chrysalis is changing into a butterfly inside. Emma tugged at Robert's hand. Can we have our picnic now? I'm starving. Of course. Robert helped them spread the checkered blanket beneath the shade of the oak tree. As they arranged sandwiches and fruit, he glanced toward the sunflowers standing tall along the garden's edge, their golden faces turned toward the sun. In those radiant blooms, he saw Catherine smile. In Emma's gentle way with her brother, he saw Catherine's nurturing spirit. In Ethan's curious questions, he saw Catherine's intelligence and wonder. She lived on in their children in the garden she had loved in the home they had created together. As he watched Emma carefully pour lemonade into her brother's cup, coaching him to use both hands, Robert unconsciously touched the Rolex on his wrist, Catherine's gift. After Victoria's arrest, he had considered putting it away, too painful a reminder. Now it symbolized something different, time that continued flowing, carrying them forward while keeping the past close. Dad, Emma's voice pulled him back to the present. Why are you smiling like that? Robert joined his children on the blanket, gratitude filling his heart. Because I'm happy, sweetheart. Because we have everything that truly matters right here. Emma nodded with the sage wisdom children sometimes possess. Family. Yes, Robert agreed, watching Ethan attempt to stuff an entire strawberry into his mouth. Family. As the afternoon sun bathed the garden in golden light, Robert Morgan knew with absolute certainty that he had kept his promise. He had protected what mattered most. And in doing so, he had found his way back to joy, back to purpose, back to life itself. In Catherine's garden, surrounded by butterflies and laughter, the Morgan family continued to grow, to heal, to thrive, living proof that even after the darkest storms, new life emerges, reaching always toward the light.